Welcome, everyone, to another custom-tailored deep dive. We're really excited to get into this one with you.
Yeah, we have some incredible source material today. I
Mhm.
mean, truly fascinating stuff.
It really is. So, to start us off, I want you to imagine just sitting down for tea in this quiet, polite living room.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. And the man sitting across from you is, well, he's courteous, he's gentle, and he speaks with this incredibly thoughtful cadence. But your wife leans over to you and whispers that having tea with this man feels like having tea with a Black Panther.
Wow.
Yeah, beautiful, aristocratic, but potentially deadly. And today we are exploring the mind of that panther.
It's just such a visceral image, right? And it really, I think, perfectly captures that immense tension of living as a public icon while also harboring this deeply complex, constantly evolving private mind.
Exactly. We tend to, we sort of prefer our historical figures as statues, right? Like
Yeah.
carved in stone, fully formed, simple to categorize.
Yeah, easily digestible.
Right. But this individual's reality was anything but simple. So for you, the listener, our mission today is to step past the mythology. We're going to look at the raw materials that forged one of the 20th century's most discussed and honestly most polarizing figures. We're talking about Malcolm X.
And we are pulling directly from some really eye-opening excerpts of the Autobiography of Malcolm X.
Specifically, we're looking at an introduction written by the journalist M.S. Handler, alongside Malcolm's own retrospective accounts of his early childhood and his adolescence.
Yeah, chapters 1 and 2, Nightmare and Mascot. And the goal here is to dismantle that caricature. We want to look at the violent forces and also the quietly insidious ones that really shaped his worldview.
Right, and to explore how his philosophy was actively adapting right up to the end of his life.
What makes these sources so compelling, I think, is that dual vantage point. We have Handler's observations of Malcolm the public phenomenon in the 1960s, juxtaposed with Malcolm's own memories of his deeply traumatic formative years in the 20s and 30s.
It's quite the contrast.
Oh, for sure. When you overlay them, you don't just see a timeline. You see the actual mechanisms of how a radical intellect is constructed.
So let's start with that Black Panther dynamic.
Right.
Because M.S. Handler, he was a reporter for the New York Times, and the text describes his very first meeting with Malcolm in March of 1963.
Right. At the restaurant.
Yeah, they meet at the Muslim restaurant of Temple Number 7 in Harlem. And Handler walks into this immaculate, silent, highly disciplined environment, and he is the only white person in the room.
Talk about intimidating.
I mean, yeah. And when Malcolm finally arrives, Handler extends his hand. The text actually notes that Malcolm's hand comes up slowly, like almost reluctantly, though he does eventually take it.
And immediately after that handshake, Malcolm does something that instantly signals to Handler exactly who he is dealing with.
What does he do?
He asks Handler if he would mind if he took the seat facing the door.
Wow.
Yeah. And Handler, he had spent years reporting in Eastern Europe. He knew survival behavior when he saw it. Malcolm was just hyper-vigilant.
Because he had to be.
Exactly. The text makes it clear he was a man who lived with the constant literal threat of assassination. He needed to see every single person who walked into that room.
Right, which makes the contrast of his personality so jarring, because on television, Malcolm was terrifying to white audiences. He projected this implacable logic, like an almost diabolic force in his public debates.
But in private, in the Handler's living room, he was that gentle, thoughtful panther.
It's almost like an evolutionary defense mechanism.
Yeah.
The terrifying public persona is the armor. It's the spikes on the outside keeping the myriad threats at bay.
That's a great way to put it.
But behind that armor, the organism is highly sensitive, constantly taking in new data, reading the environment, and adapting to survive.
That evolutionary analogy is highly accurate, especially when you look at what Handler observes just a year later in 1964. Handler details this massive, fundamental shift in Malcolm's attitude toward the white establishment and the country as a whole.
Right. This is when he breaks away from Elijah Muhammad.
Exactly. He leaves the Nation of Islam. And we really have to understand the stakes here. This wasn't just a polite disagreement. Leaving the nation meant losing his entire support system.
His platform, his physical protection.
Everything. It was a profoundly dangerous leap.
And the sources mention he was shocked by certain secular practices within the nation, but his worldview was also just, rapidly expanding at this time.
Right. He travels to Mecca.
Yes. He discovers this broader Islamic brotherhood that doesn't recognize color bars. He starts speaking at Eastern universities and is genuinely surprised by the positive, intellectually curious response from white students.
The text notes his realization that not all white people were, quote, devils. He shifts from attacking the United States as this monolithic enemy to developing a highly targeted critique.
Like focusing on overt supremacists in the South and covert ones in the North.
Precisely. He begins to recognize black people as an integral part of the American community, moving away from that doctrine of total separation. And Handler points out that Assassin's bullets ended his career right at this midpoint.
Right as he was preparing to raise militancy to a new high, but with a highly refined surgical focus.
Exactly.
But wait, I'm struggling with something here, and I think you at home might be too. This is a massive philosophical pivot.
Oh, huge.
If he was literally dodging assassins, constantly having to sit, facing the door, navigating all this extreme danger, how on earth did he find the mental bandwidth to undergo such a fundamental shift in his own belief system?
It's a really valid question.
Because usually when people are under existential threat, they double down on their dogmas. They lock in. They don't open their minds to nuance.
It's a fantastic point, and the text actually suggests that for Malcolm, critical thinking and survival were completely intertwined. He wasn't analyzing philosophy in a vacuum. He was analyzing the world to survive it.
That makes a lot of sense.
His willingness to question his own foundational beliefs, even at the cost of his safety, it really highlights his core conviction. That knowledge must be applied, and truth has to supersede dogma.
If the reality on the ground changed, his philosophy had to adapt.
Exactly. To be rigid was to be dead.
So to really understand why he initially viewed the white establishment as a monolithic devil and why it took so much empirical evidence for him to shift that view, we have to look back at his very first interactions with that establishment.
Yeah, we have to go back to his childhood.
And those early encounters were defined by unimaginable violence and bureaucracy.
The contrast between that deeply analytical man in the restaurant and the boy born into the nightmare of the 1920s is just staggering.
Yeah.
Systemic oppression wasn't an abstract concept for him. It was the defining feature of his reality from the exact moment of his birth.
The sources outline this beautifully. Before he is even born, his mother is pregnant with him in Omaha, Nebraska, and one night a party of hooded Ku Klux Klan riders surrounds their house.
It's terrifying.
Brandishing shotguns, demanding his father come out. Now, his father, Earl Little, was a Baptist minister, but more dangerously for the time, he was a dedicated organizer for Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association.
Right, the Garvey movement.
Yeah, he was preaching black independence and a return to Africa.
Which naturally made him a massive target. And Earl Little knew the risks. The text points out this staggering legacy of violence in his family. He had already seen 4 of his 6 brothers die by violence, including one by lynching.
My God.
And yet, he continued his organizing work. And when the family moves to Lansing, Michigan, the geographical shift doesn't end the terror. The threats just change uniforms.
Right. Instead of the white robes of the KKK, the family is targeted by a hate society called the Black Legion, who wore black robes.
Right.
And this leads to Malcolm's very first vivid memory from around 1929. He's just a little kid, and he's snatched awake by the sounds of pistol shots, shouting, and roaring flames.
The Black Legion had set their house on fire.
Yes. The family is lunging around, escaping into the yard in just their underwear. And the most chilling detail from the text: the white police and firemen just stand there, arms folded.
Just watching.
Watching the house burn to the ground.
It is the ultimate betrayal of the social contract. The authorities aren't just failing to protect them. They are passively endorsing the terror.
Yeah.
And the violence escalates. A couple of years later, Earl Little goes out one afternoon. Malcolm's mother actually has this visceral premonition of his death.
Oh, wow.
And later that night, the police arrive. Earl Little's body is found laid across the streetcar tracks. His skull is crushed in. His body is nearly cut in half.
That is horrific.
The black community absolutely knew he had been attacked by the Black Legion and placed on those tracks.
But here is where the institutional violence really backs up the physical violence. The insurance company covering his life refuses to pay out the larger policy.
Of course they do.
They claim this 6'4", incredibly strong man somehow bashed his own head in and then laid himself across the tracks. They label it a suicide to avoid paying.
It's just evil.
It plunges the family, a widow with 8 children during the Great Depression, into absolute desperation. They are so hungry. Malcolm talks about being dizzy from it.
You're just starved.
Yeah. They boil dandelion greens, which the neighbors cruelly mock as fried grass. The boys are out hunting frogs and rabbits just to sell to white neighbors for nipples.
This extreme engineered poverty is what brings the state welfare workers into their home. And this transition is crucial. We move from the overt violence of the Black Legion to the covert psychological violence of the state bureaucracy.
This is a real revelation in the text. You would naturally assume the burning house or the brutal murder of his father would be the ultimate breaking point for a child.
Right, of course.
But Malcolm explicitly points to the bureaucratic warfare of the welfare system as the thing that actually destroyed his family. He describes them as vultures.
Vultures, yeah.
So why is the clipboard worse than the torch?
Well, because the torch destroys the physical home, but the clipboard systematically strips away human agency and dignity. The state workers didn't just bring inadequate relief food that was actually stamped with not to be sold, which publicly signaled their poverty.
Oh, that's so degrading.
Exactly. They brought a fundamental structural lack of respect. Malcolm says, quote, "In their eyesight, we were just things, that was all. They treated his mother as an incompetent subject to be managed, not a grieving mother trying to survive."
There's a heartbreaking example of this in the book. A neighbor offers them some butchered pork, but his mother refuses it because she had recently become a Seventh-day Adventist and was strictly following their dietary laws.
Right.
The welfare workers literally called her crazy to her face for refusing meat when her kids were hungry. They weaponized her own religious principles, using her remaining pride as proof of her mental instability.
Exactly. And they actively sowed division among the children. They would pull the kids aside, ask who was smarter, ask Malcolm why he was, quote, so different.
Just playing mind games with kids.
Yeah, they were planting seeds of alienation, slowly laying the psychological groundwork to justify breaking the family apart. They framed putting the children into foster homes as a legitimate administrative solution. The constant surveillance, the removal of her agency, the utter stripping of her pride, it eventually drove his mother to a complete mental breakdown.
She gets committed to the Kalamazoo State Mental Hospital, where she stays for 26 long years.
26 years.
And Malcolm's conclusion on this is definitive. He says, "I truly believe that if ever a state social agency destroyed a family, it destroyed ours. The state penalizing them for collapsing under the weight of a system designed to crush them."
It completely reframes our understanding of trauma, doesn't it? The violence killed his father, but the bureaucracy dismantled his family piece by piece.
This is so true. And once that family structure is shattered, Malcolm becomes a ward of the state. He is removed from that overtly hostile environment and thrust into a completely different social setting.
Mason, Michigan.
Right. And the nature of the prejudice he faces mutates. It's no longer wearing a hood, it's wearing a friendly smile.
Right. Before he leaves Lansing, though, there's this really fascinating detour. He tries his hand at boxing right after Joe Louis wins the championship.
The boxing match.
Yeah. He fights a white boy named Bill Peterson, and Peterson knocks him down about 50 times.
50 times.
The humiliation is intense, especially the silent disappointment from his younger brother, Reginald. So Malcolm trains intensely for a rematch.
And the rematch is a total disaster. He gets knocked out in the first 10 seconds.
10 seconds. Malcolm later reflects that it was Allah's work stopping him from getting brain damage in the ring.
Yeah.
But the cultural context of this is vital.
How so?
In that era, the boxing ring was perceived as the absolute only arena where a black man could physically whip a white man and not be lynched for it.
Oh, wow.
So when he fails at the only socially accepted avenue of dominance, his frustration boils over elsewhere.
Which leads to his expulsion from school. He puts a thumbtack on his white teacher's chair, and this lands him in a detention home in Mason, Michigan, waiting to be sent to reform school.
Right.
The detention home is run by a white couple, the Sorlins. And this is where Malcolm experiences the deeply confusing nature of kindly condescension.
By the standards of the day, the Sorlins treat him incredibly well. They give him his own room, which was the very first room he's ever had to himself.
Right.
They let him eat at the dining table with them, which was his first time eating a meal with grain white people. He sweeps, he mops, he does chores. They genuinely like him.
But the text reveals this massive, jarring caveat. They casually use the most horrific racial slurs right in front of him constantly.
Right.
And it wasn't out of overt malice. It was because they genuinely did not consider him a fully realized human being who could understand or be hurt by the word.
Yeah.
Malcolm observes that they talked freely in front of him the same way people talk in front of a pet canary. A local judge would come over and look him up and down with an approving expression, like he was examining a pedigreed pup.
It's a profound cognitive dissonance. Malcolm realizes that even though they physically opened the door to their home, The door to actual equality was completely shut.
Yeah.
They did not give him credit for having the same sensitivity, intellect, or emotional depth they would instantly recognize in a white boy. He was physically with them, but he was fundamentally not of them.
Think about how disorienting that is for a child. It's a bizarre paradox. It's like conditional humanity. They're extending charity to him, but it's the kind of charity you give to a stray animal, not a fellow citizen.
Exactly.
It's an illusion of integration, where the price of admission is your own dignity. How does a child process that psychological whiplash, especially after the overt violence of his early years?
It creates a completely different kind of psychological damage. The overt violence of the Black Legion tells you exactly where you stand, right? You are the enemy, and they want to destroy you.
Clear as day.
But this liberal condescension messes with your perception of reality. It tells you that you are liked, that you are succeeding, while simultaneously reinforcing that you are an inferior species.
And he experiences the absolute peak of this cognitive dissonance when Mrs. Swerlin enrolls him in Mason Junior High School. He is the only Black student in his entire grade.
Right. And he thrives by all their metrics. He gets top grades, he's a star on the basketball team, he is highly popular, and he even gets elected 7th grade class president.
Yet, as he looks back on it, Malcolm recognizes he was being treated as a novelty. He literally refers to his past self as a pink poodle.
A pink poodle? That's so evocative.
His popularity wasn't rooted in genuine equality. It was rooted in his unique, non-threatening status as the town's special mascot.
The specific examples of this conditional acceptance are infuriating. When he travels with the basketball team to play in other towns, the opposing crowds scream racial slurs at him.
And no one does anything.
Right. It doesn't bother his coach or his teammates at all. They just brush it off. Worse, the white boys at his own school, his friends, constantly try to push him to proposition their own sisters.
Wow.
Because of the racial taboo of the time, they want to use him as a sort of hammer to break down the girls' resistance for their own benefit. They're leveraging his race as a tool. And this dehumanization is institutionalized in the classroom as well. His history teacher, Mr. Williams, comes to the section on Negro history in their textbook.
Oh, this part.
It is exactly 1 paragraph long. The teacher laughs his way through it, reading aloud that Black people were slaves and were usually lazy and dumb.
Unbelievable.
Then the teacher adds his own racist joke, telling the class that Black people's feet are so big they don't leave tracks, they leave a hole in the ground.
It is structural humiliation masquerading as education. And Malcolm reflects that he was succeeding by every single metric the white world set for him, the grades, the sports, the presidency, but he realized he was entirely invisible as a man.
Yeah.
He notes that this Mason experience is exactly why he later warned Black Americans that they were wasting their time straining to integrate into a system that fundamentally saw them as mascots. He had already achieved the ultimate integration, and he found it completely hollow.
That realization is the crux of his ideological formation. He wasn't born radicalized, he wasn't born angry. He was shaped by a society that, at every conceivable level, from the violent KKK to the bureaucratic welfare state to the smiling, condescending townspeople, refused to recognize his humanity.
Yeah.
The tragedy of his family's destruction showed him the utter ruthlessness of the system, but his time as a mascot showed him the deep-seated hypocrisy of it.
It is a remarkable journey we've gone on today. We've seen how the terrifying public icon was actually a deeply thoughtful, highly adaptable private man, constantly analyzing his environment just to survive.
Yeah, that hypervigilance.
We've seen how the cold bureaucracy of a dehumanizing welfare system did more lasting damage to a family than a burning house. And we've explored the painful realization that conditional acceptance, being invited in as a mascot, is really just a more insidious form of rejection.
For you, the listener, the key takeaway from these sources is a richer understanding of how complex ideologies are forged. Malcolm's mind was in constant motion because the survival of his humanity demanded it.
Right.
He had to keep learning, keep shifting, and keep questioning the rules of a game that was rigged against him from the very day he was born.
And that brings us to our final thought for today. I want to leave you with something to mull over, something that builds on Malcolm's realization but applies to our own lives and careers.
Always good to reflect on that.
Exactly. In the sources, Malcolm reflects that as a boy, he was brainwashed into feeling proud of his unique status among white people. He was trying incredibly hard to be white himself, to fit perfectly into their mold of what success looked like.
Yeah.
So consider your own life. How much of your own progress or success in society is actually just you eagerly playing a role in a game designed by someone
That's
else?
a deep question.
Are you genuinely succeeding on your own terms, or are you just proud to be the mascot of a system you haven't questioned?